My husband, Marc Emery.
It's the first time I'm getting an idea of how many people are here. We're having a really good time. You know, it seems like we've been here a lot longer than we have. We arrived a little after noon and spent time walking along the Clyde and downtown and smoking joints all along. And, you know, she's a bit different from me. I have no idea what you people are talking about when you speak. That's not true. My mom actually always sounded to me like a character out of Monty Python. She grew up 200 miles south here in Birmingham, England. My dad's from Birmingham, England. They moved to Canada, interestingly enough, in 1951 after the Depression and World War II, because my father said he didn't want to bring me up in a class society. And he said he grew up as a working class boy, and it was labeled to him, and he felt it was going to be that way for a long time in the UK, so he came to Canada. So that's by an accident of immigration, and I'm not actually a citizen of the UK. I was actually very encouraged today by what I saw, because you have all the elements for a very fruitful and productive movement here towards the ultimate goal, which is that no one go to jail in Scotland for cannabis, whether it's growing, selling, dealing, whatever it is. No one should go to jail. In the Just Society, punishment of cannabis is absurd. And I saw you've got a seed company, you've got these hemp stores, you've got political activism, you've got filmmakers, you've got every cultural touchstone that I tried to restart in Vancouver in the mid-90s. Which my work there I'll get to in more detail, but what I had in mind was a total recreation of a movement. Our media, you know, filmmakers, magazines, seeds to make sure we had ultimately millions and millions of plants growing throughout North America, and political establishment, people working in political parties, people running in political parties, every kind of cultural milestone or cultural touchstone you could think of, I wanted to recreate. And we've by and large done that in Vancouver. And I see the potential for that here. One of the things I was suggesting to some of the people who've been so nice enough to host us is that Scotland needs a cannabis cup of some kind. Before I start my usual sort of talk, I thought there's such a burgeoning potential here. I'd like to come back. I mean, you started to have 420 celebrations on April 20th, and I'm thinking this would be a great place for a global marijuana march at some point, you know, in the first or second weekend of May. And I'd love to come back and help you and lead that parade, if you ever wanted to do that. In the upcoming year, next year, we're doing Toronto, and then the following we're in Marseille, France, and at their global marijuana march. But the following year would be awesome if Glasgow would have one and we could come. That would be a lot of fun, because I see huge potential here, and I think you're really going to go places, and I hope my story that I'm telling you, I'm going to put this in here. Or maybe I won't, because it doesn't. I'm hoping my story can be used as a catalyst to further experimentation, activism, and that sort of thing. I've been to jail. Actually, I've been arrested 28 times for cannabis civil disobedience, and I've been raided 5 times. The state took about $1.5 million worth of my stuff over 5 raids. I've been jailed 23 times, and most recently, I just finished a 4.5-year sentence in the United States for, of all things, sending cannabis seeds in the mail to people in the United States. Now, I did do a lot of it. I will tell you that. After 10 years, I'm responsible for 3 million seeds that went to the United States. I'll actually segue a bit. That's right. Well, those 3 million seeds, I'm kind of rushing ahead, really. I shouldn't tell you this part, but I should go in chronological order. But the reason I started selling seeds was not because I really had any great love of botany, although I've since learned so many things about that. I've gone to hundreds of grow rooms, seeing marijuana being grown, and many fields outdoors, and even hemp fields. Jody and I went to a massive hemp field in Canada just before I got sent to the United States. With those seeds, what I thought, I went to the Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam in 1994. And, you know, I was given a report on what the progress was like in Canada. I mean, Canada, back in those days, Boy, it was rough in 1990. The government had banned everything in Canada. They banned all books and magazines about marijuana. There was no High Times available on the newsstands. There were no grow books. There was not even truthful information in the form of a pamphlet. Normal couldn't exist in Canada. Normal Canada eventually is how we get to court to overturn that really terrible law. But it took 4 years. But in 1990, anybody here used to be into punk music? Or might still be punk? Okay. Well, this is how I throw names around to make it look like I was once cool. And I used to be a fan of a group called the Dead Kennedys in the 1980s. Now, they were really an outstanding band. You can still listen to their stuff and it's still awesome. But the lead singer went on to do a spoken word kind of talking cure kind of talk thing that I do now to some degree. And he came to my town and I sponsored him to give a talk at our main conference hall. And Jello Biafra, part of his gig in 1989 when I met him, was a segment called Grow More Pot. And he actually talked about this book, this amazing book of the hidden history of cannabis, which has been very big for my generation of activists. It's called The Emperor Wears No Clothes by a fellow named Jack Herrera. An absolutely stunning book. Almost no one knows of it these days because everything has superseded it. Now, I almost feel like that Monty Python character saying to young people, oh, luxury, look what you've got to work with in this day and age, right? You got all this great marijuana being grown, you got seed shops, you got this, back in my day there was nothing, right? And in fact, Jack Herrera's book pointed out that cannabis hemp has been part of civilization's history for 10,000 years. It's the oldest husbanded crop used agriculturally. It's been used for sails and rigging for the navies of the UK, France, Russia, and all the imperial powers for centuries. It was used as a medicine in the pharmacopoeia for over 150 years. All these fantastic things that I had never heard of before. And it was all, but he said, get this book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes. So I went to a bookstore, and this is by 1990, and I was told the shocking news that this book was banned and that all books about marijuana had been banned in Canada for 3 years, since 1987. And no one was interested in defying the ban, which was really odd to me, because booksellers, are usually, freedom first and what happens. Nobody was doing anything. And additionally, in 1985, there were over 500 what they called head shops throughout Canada. And they were usually run by Pakistani guys or immigrants from Asia. And they sold a variety of incense and Indian pipes. And if you're old enough, you might even remember those sort of things from about 35 years ago. And that's how it was done back in those days. And they were all put out of business. And the interesting thing about that, from a historical perspective, is the police went to those businesses in 1985, 86, 87, and said, it's a $100,000 fine now for you to operate like this, so your business license is canceled and you have to close up. And they got uniformity across the entire country. Every single head shop closed from 1985 to 1987, and all books and magazines about cannabis were banned, and everything about our culture completely evaporated and disappeared. So in 1990, I found this fantastic that this book had been banned, and I had a history of defying authorities in other areas, economic areas, freedom of speech areas. For example, in 1986, all the shops in Canada, surprisingly, now again, were closed on Sunday. Now they always said it's labor legislation, but in reality it's just a Sabbath law, and because Christianity in Canada was founded largely by Christians, all these shops were closed on Sunday, and I thought that was absurd. So I started breaking that law in a variety of ways, including the one I eventually go to jail for, which was you're not actually prohibited so much from selling, you just can't even open your doors on a Sunday in the old days. So on the day before Christmas, I dressed up as Santa Claus and bought an ad in the newspaper and said, listen, I'm going to be giving $10 worth of books to everybody who comes in my bookshop, and it's free, because it's the day before Christmas. It's a Sunday, true, but I'm going to be Santa Claus, and everybody gets free books. So lots of people did come in, but the police also came in. I gave them a press release, and they charged me. You can't be open on the Sabbath. That's just the way it is. And they charged me with that. And eventually I don't pay the fine, and they put me in jail. Now, a lot of publicity attended that, and what eventually happens is they changed the law, almost specifically at first for me, so bookshops are allowed to open on Sunday, and then within 6 months the whole regime collapsed, and now everybody in Canada can operate a shop on Sunday, and they have done so for 25 years. And the important thing about that, though, is I lost in court. The law was changed and I lost in court. And I thought that was interesting because the ridicule that was heaped on the government and the pent-up demand from all the other business people were such that the government became moved and changed the law. So I thought, well, that's good. I even lost in court and they changed the law. So the next thing that happened, I thought I'd pick something really quick, was that the police in my province had gone around all the shops that sold music and banned a CD. They said, this rap music is obscene, it's all about sex, you can't sell this rap music. Now, of course, nowadays we know that almost all rap music of a contemporary sort is about sex, but this was a provocative record put out this time by a Florida rap group called the Two Live Crew, and it was a CD called As Nasty As They Want to Be, and it was certainly all about sex, but nothing to me so horrific that the police should go to record shops and ban it, and then try and enforce that. So what I did is I put an ad in the newspaper, and by the way, you'll begin to see a pattern. I'm putting an ad in the newspaper saying, come and get me, and so I had bought a half-page ad, and he said, we're going to have this banned CD, and we're going to have hundreds and hundreds of copies, and you should come down and buy it. And sure enough, there was a big line outside our front door, right down the block, around the corner, hundreds of people lined up, huge media publicity, and the second guy in line is a policeman, and he buys a copy, and he goes back, and by the time he gets a search warrant, lucky me, I have sold all our copies to the hundreds of people in line, and now it's settled down to a normal afternoon. By the time they raid me, later on that afternoon, they search the place and they find no other copies, and sure enough, they take me to court. And that's an amusing thing. All obscenity trials, if it's not really obscene, are inherently funny. And the thing is, they wouldn't play the tape in open court, which is kind of what they're supposed to do, to let, say justice has been done before we send you to the gallows over this obscene thing. People should at least have heard it to determine if, in fact, it might be obscene in a court context. And they didn't play it, but instead, the Crown Attorney, and I believe you probably call it that here too, the prosecutor, the Crown Attorney, read the lyrics aloud to the judge. and so hearing a very straight guy, going, the lyrics, Your Honor, me so horny, me love you long time. Like, so people were howling, just rolling over the aisles, and it went on for an hour and a half. And the judge constantly hit the gavel. He said, there'll be order in the court. This is a serious matter. This is not a laughing matter. But my whole point was, but it's obviously a laughing matter. And anything people laugh at can't be obscene. There's a little kind of reference I want to jump, and I shouldn't do that because I might need you to reel me back in at some point to where I was supposed to be. But you'll notice too, when cannabis shows up in the headlines of newspapers, they like to make puns that are funny about it. Oh, this lot of weed went up in smoke, or this kind. You're always going to see funny references. People laugh when they report the news about news stories where marijuana's in. And there's nothing else like that. This is a criminal offense. You could go to jail. I've certainly gone to jail many, many times for cannabis. And this used to go on all the time in Canada. And it would kind of irritate me because nobody makes jokes about rape or murder or burglary or arson or theft or any other kind of criminal violation. But as soon as they're talking about people that get arrested for pot, there's the inherent sense that it's okay to laugh about this. It's okay to make fun about this. That there's no real victims here. Pot's a fun thing. We all admit. But what they're all really conceding is that no one actually out there believes pot should be justifying a criminal offense. Because we don't laugh at things that are generally harmful to our fellow human beings. We don't laugh at things that are generally a threat to the public safety. We laugh about things that are worthy of laughter, which is a ridiculous and absurd law against cannabis. Okay, so now I'm going to jump back. I just want to point that out, that ours is the only kind of so-called criminal offense that people routinely laugh about in almost any media discussion. There's a tendency of all politicians not even to want to take it seriously, which belies the fact that they should legalize it. If you're laughing about it and always having ha-ha-has about the stoners and what have you, then probably it shouldn't be a criminal offense. But jumping back in, I got through that court thing, and they found me guilty again. And this time, though, the judge said it has a public interest, so you're not going to be punished beyond the fact that you're found guilty. But again, I lost in court, and they never banned another record again. It was, again, so much ridicule, so much, laughter, so much negative publicity that the police have never even tried to ban music in Canada since. So I thought, well, this is a really good track record. I've lost twice, and yet I won twice. And I lost in court, but the laws got changed. I thought, well, so when this Jello Biafra fellow was coming and doing his talking cure, and I heard this, I went to get that book, and then I did the same thing again. Bought a full half-page ad in the daily paper in London, invited the police to come and charge me, got this book. Eventually, they don't charge me that day, much to my surprise, so I ended up getting dozens and dozens of grow guides and High Times back issues, eventually hundreds and hundreds of books. And again, we had lineups around the block. Well, because it had been banned for 3-4 years, there was a huge pent-up demand for all these materials. And I did meet hundreds of people excited and interested to buy anything that would tell them some information about marijuana. Eventually, we do get charged. We end up, this is interesting that you could get charged. We do get charged. Giving out pamphlets to students. One of the common techniques of the police in the old days, I hope they don't do it now, but it's possible, would be to send an attractive young woman, undercover officer, into a high school to go around and ask all the boys, essentially, you know, all the kids, where can I get weed? And of course, you know, you send an attractive young, obviously older woman, really, I mean, into a high school to buy pot. Every fellow's going to trip over himself to find out whether he smokes pot or not. I mean, you know, this hot girl asking me if I get marijuana. Of course I get marijuana, even if I never smoked in my life. So it's a convenient way to round up 25, 30 convictions. I always say a big ring going on in the high school, you know, with one attractive person. If he'd have been some crazy guy with some deformity, nobody would have tried to sell him weed, right? But if it's an attractive... So... you should pause right now because I wonder where that story is going. And I haven't smoked anything recently, so it's not short-term.
Pamphlets at students.
Right, pamphlets at students. So after one of these students, one of these roundups happens, and we have 30, 40 people being charged, we go to that high school, and outside the front door, but off the property, we give out pamphlets saying, do you know your rights? Do you know? And it's sponsored by Normal Canada. Well, the police come and charge everyone giving out those pamphlets. And they say you're not allowed to give out information about marijuana, and we're going to charge you law. So after all the trying of 4 years of High Times magazine growth, we get charged with giving out a political pamphlet to young people about their rights after they've been charged with all these offenses. So that we got to court in July 1994, 4 years after starting that campaign, and a judge ruled this is obviously unconstitutional. This is ridiculous. We did get a Charter of Rights in Canada in 1982. That's our constitution. Up till then, we were a Dominion of Canada. Our constitution was out of Westminster in London. And in 1982, we became fully independent by having our own constitution and Charter of Rights. Canadians kind of forget this. But so in a sense, we've been a fully autonomous nation since 1982. But this was one of the first really important rulings regarding literature and freedom of information in the courts in 1994. So, well, defying the law ultimately got us books and magazines made legal, and ever since then. So the following year I decided, well, we've really got to up this ante, because now we've got books and magazines, we need to make sure hemp stores get reestablished. They'd all been put out of business, so we opened a hemp store in 1994, and rather than set up a chain of them, I did something that turned out to be very influential. We put out a pamphlet after I'd been in business for a year, advising how anybody can do a revolutionary, radical retail hemp business in their own community. And we spread this idea, and eventually we helped 60 stores open across Canada within the first year in 1995, 1996. And it took off like wildfire. People were doing political activities out of these stores, all these great things. And then I went to see the Cannabis Cup, and I was inspired by Ben Dronkers to really move things fast. Because I got up and I talked about how, oh, we just legalized, you know, books and magazines in Canada. It seemed like a big achievement at the time. And then Ben Dronkers got up and said, well, we sold 1 million seeds that produce 5 million plants that represent several megatons of weed. And, you know, and so we've been, you know, corrupting and subverting all these prohibitionist states around the world. And I thought, man, I love that guy. I want to do what he's doing. So I immediately got involved with buying these seeds, bringing them back to Canada. No one else was doing that. It's illegal in Canada and the United States to sell seeds, as I'm going to find out at a later date we'll get to. And so we started selling it. And the only reason I sold it is because I wanted to raise a lot of money quick. One of the things I had always noticed when I started my marijuana legalization advocacy full-time in 1990 is that there was a mostly, don't take this wrong, but a socialist ethos in the community that was advocating. And by the way, I grew up in a socialist household, so there's nothing inherently wrong with socialism. But the lubricant of liberty in regards to our movement is money. You need money to promote change. You need money to organize. You need, things just cost money. And in Europe, I noticed, including Scotland, they cost a lot of money, actually. I've been in jail for 5 years. There was a real price shock when I got to my hometown and go, wow, prices of everything have really gone up, and rents and everything like that. And then I went to Spain and Ireland and here, and I'm thinking prices are expensive everywhere. I even wonder what people do to earn enough money to pay for these prices, right? The cost of living, what have you. Political activity needs money, as well as organization and passion. So I determined that not only was I going to sell seeds and raise a lot of money and give it away, which turns out to be a brilliant idea and works really well, but I've also wanted to impart to all others in Canada that you should open a business. You should get involved in some aspect, whether it's a grow shop, or whether it's developing new products, or whether it's growing weed, or whether it's having a book or a magazine or some kind of activity that is inherently self-sustaining. In other words, it can go on. There's a market for it. Because the sooner we all become businessmen, the more effective we'll be as political salesmen too, right? If we're always struggling to find money, it's hard to actively politically agitate. But if we're all in business and we're all working together, cooperating and earning money together, creating money, creating wealth in our community, that was to me a fundamental message. So along with getting the books and magazines legal and then reinvigorating all these hemp stores across Canada and giving instruction, clear instruction on how they can quit what they're doing, open a shop, and become self-sufficient as well as integrated into our own increasingly active political economy, and then the seeds, what happens, I started selling seeds aggressively to Americans and Canadians and anybody around the world, and eventually we raised $5 million in profit over a 10-year period. We give that away, and it did phenomenal things. Like, for example, I was the chief, I paid for a lot of the signatures for the ballot initiative in Washington, D.C. to put medical marijuana on the ballot, which actually passed, and was held up by the U.S. Congress for about 12 years, but finally Washington, D.C. has a medical marijuana law, and furthermore, this November, they are voting for full legalization, which will be kind of trippy to have full legalization in the jurisdiction where the actual Congress is, so that, in fact, you could smoke weed on the doorstep of the Congress, theoretically, and there should be no criminal penalty. So it'll be fascinating to see how that goes. But we also paid for the signatures to be gathered for Colorado's medical marijuana initiative in 2000, and Arizona's in 2000. And other ones in Alaska too, and class action suits. We sued the U.S. federal government to bring back the compassionate use program for medical marijuana, which they used to have, but they don't have now. Now we lost that, but sometimes it was a good result, sometimes not such a great result. But we did pay for the first 5 years of the global marijuana marches, all their publicity and everything like that. We did that for 5 years. And we eventually created the first video, cannabis video thing on the internet, the station on the internet, the Pot TV internet network, we call it back. That was in January 2000. Possibly one of the first or the first video website in the world, since it was extremely prohibitive until YouTube came along in 2006. So, and then we started Cannabis Culture magazine in the same year, 1994. So we're legalizing books and magazines. We are getting hemp shops in all the cities in Canada. Then we create a magazine that comes out every 2 months, Cannabis Culture magazine. Back in those days, it was just Cannabis Culture and High Times. And we created a magazine that went for 15 years that we had to shut down before I went to prison because I couldn't afford to really hire someone to do my job for it. And then we were selling seeds, and the idea of that was, and our slogan was, plant the seeds of freedom, overgrow the government. Now, overgrow the government's a great term. I've always loved it. Maybe the nicest little phrase I ever came up with, because it does suggest overthrow. And in my more extreme moments, I would love to overthrow the government. I've got a catalog of things that have always bothered me about government. And I think, yes, the problem with overthrow is there's the sense of violence involved, of confrontation. When you overgrow the government, it's letting biology and botany just take its due. Then we're going to plant so many plants. And I would say this, and this later comes back to haunt me in a grave way, but I'm still proud of it, and I'm not ashamed of it. But that phrase, overgrow the government, I would explain to people that my idea is that I can single-handedly end the war on drugs by making it so that there's millions and millions of plants being grown in the United States and Canada at such a rate, because of the seeds I'm selling, that the DEA and all the police forces of America and Canada will not be able to keep up with just the work of one person. That I alone could create more marijuana than all the governments of North America can destroy at the same time. And I said, and that's the power of one person. Well, that in fact begins to have a really big effect, because people go, wow, that is pretty neat. That's pretty major stuff, right? Now, you know, and I see myself as the heroic character in my own movie. I always have. You know, and so this is perfectly consistent with my, you can look at it as megalomania, or just even just my self-image. The thought that every day I would go to sleep that I was creating more work and more plants than the DEA and the RCMP and all the police forces in America could possibly destroy was immensely satisfying. And I would say so in those interviews that I would do on radio and TV. I'm in lots of movies, like 5 or 6, 7 movies about the work I've done. And I would say this in radio shows and TV shows. And eventually the DEA says, well, there's going to be a price for that. Right? And there is, but it's coming down there because one of the things I've always done is I've confronted the authorities. So what I haven't told you was that when I started selling seeds and starting all this money, we got raided 4 times in 1997, 1996, 1997, 1998. Took everything I had, and we didn't close shop. Opened next day with whatever I had to sell, and we just built it back up again. The demand was so strong that we were never put out of business. And so I got raided 4 times in the 90s, and eventually again in 2005. I got arrested all the time for all sorts of things. Selling it. I have convictions for crimes I did not know exist. I'm always amazed at what these crimes. I actually have a conviction for promoting vaporizers. Because in 1997 I came up with the first cannabis cafe. All the food that we served in our restaurant had hemp seed oil in it, or hemp seed flour, or hemp seeds, every single thing. So no matter what you ordered from the menu, there was an element of hemp seed or hemp product in it. And then at each table where you ate, there were, for the time, state-of-the-art vaporizers, very primitive compared to today. But there were vaporizers, so there was an instruction guide on how to use the vaporizer while your hemp food was being, you know, prepared for you and brought to you. It was really quite a lovely experience. But when the police raided it, they took all those vaporizers, and they charged me for promoting the use of vaporizers, which apparently has been a crime, although I'm the only person ever to have been convicted of it. And there's a lot of examples of that. I'm the only, I'm the only person really convicted who's ever been served time in U.S. prison for seeds. The only person in jail in Canada or in America ever for seeds, right? I've got all these little oddball things. I'm the only guy that's ever been charged, type of thing. So the idea was to recreate a whole kind of revolutionary and retail capitalist structure in our movement so that people were in business, they had materials to read, they had video to watch when Pot TV comes out, they had examples to follow. There was a whole now chain of communication between all the activists in Canada that didn't exist. And it happened very rapidly. And with all the money I got, I was giving it away like crazy to all sorts of things. I sponsored a wonderful drug addiction clinic that I ran myself, where I would give a very, it's probably not even illegal, and if anybody here is ever interested in it, you should talk to me because I have a lot of experience. If you know anybody who's got a substance abuse problem and is looking to wean themselves off that, I used to give out a very powerful and effective substance called Ibogaine, or ibogaine hydrochloride. And it stopped withdrawal, opiate withdrawal, morphine withdrawal, or withdrawal from any drug immediately, and created a very positive state of mind for this now former drug user. And I did this with 65 patients over a period of 2 years. And it cost me about $200,000. It was one of the many projects we spent that $5 million on. And so anyway, so we were doing all these great things, and I was breaking the law in 2003, for example, amongst all these other laws that I was deliberately breaking. I decided to go across Canada and smoke a big bong or a 1 ounce joint in front of, that's a very provocative statement, by the way, when your activity, when you smoke a 1 ounce joint, is like 14 inches long and it's huge. And everybody really wants to get a hit of that joint. So, but I went across Canada and in front of 18 cities across Canada, smoked in front of the police station. Now I had a bit of a motive there because some judges were declaring the pot laws null and void, and no one was paying attention to that. So I went across Canada to demonstrate that in some jurisdictions it was now legal to possess pot and you could smoke it openly. And in the areas where the judges hadn't declared that, I wanted to get charged so I could go to court and explain the legal reasoning behind why I felt and why other judges in other jurisdictions were saying there was no more pot laws. So I got arrested in 6 cities on that tour: Edmonton, Calgary, Regina. If you know anything about Canada, Winnipeg, Moncton, and St. John's. And then in 12 others, I didn't get arrested. And when those areas I didn't get arrested, people came and partied with me for hours on the doorstep of the police station. I have a wonderful picture smoking in front of the Windsor police station, which is a place that will come back in my history a little later. But once they didn't arrest me at 420, people started smoking joints, and there's people standing on the words Windsor Police Department smoking big joints in this picture I've done. It's quite a remarkable thing how people, when given their freedom, really do want to celebrate it. And that was, that's covered in a movie called Escape to Canada, if you want to watch that. It's a very good little movie, and it's a wonderful time where it looked like Canada was going to decriminalize marijuana. Some people ask me, well, why are you so passionate? You know, you've gone to jail these 28 times, gone to jail 23 times. And I've even gone to jail, by the way, for 3 months for passing one joint, which is spectacular. But it makes me think of Scotland in this one sense. It was in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I was at a university speaking. After I spoke, we went to a park, and 40 of us smoked lots of joints, really. And by the time a police officer walks up, it's about 11 o'clock at night, and all the pot's smoked, and there's nothing around. And the police officer says to somebody, what are you doing here? He says, I'm here smoking a joint with Mr. Emery. And the police officer asks, he said, well, did Mr. Emery pass you a joint? And the person said, yes. I don't know what they were thinking. You know, when people should say silent, they often don't. So anyway, he says, so the police officer immediately arrests me, hauls me off, and it takes me 7 days just to get bail, because now I'm being charged with trafficking. Right, trafficking, and then eventually, and I get convicted of 3 months eventually. It's shocking. But that very same community where in 2004 I got a 3-month sentence. Now, if you watch Pot TV the other day, they just had the Saskatchewan Cannabis Cup. It's their second or third one. I think it's their third one. It's got hundreds of people spending 2 days smoking pot nonstop at a rather public facility. There were 27 different strains of pot. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm talking to the guy, Jeremiah, who's there on behalf of Pot TV, I'm thinking, really? Like, this is the same place that put me in jail 3 months for one joint. And now they've got a big 2-day pot-smoking, non-stop affair with hundreds of people and local growers, and the police aren't coming and doing anything. It's broadcast live on Pot TV, the whole thing of it, right? And so you can see, in some places, spectacular progress. Like, there's an amazing wave going across the earth right now that favors our culture. Finally, after all these years, you know, the majorities in the United States and Canada want to legalize, and that it's being talked about everywhere. We were just in Spain, and we saw a remarkable scene in Barcelona where there's over 200 clubs selling cannabis to people there. And I mean, some of them are very beautiful clubs, too. We went to a place called the Strain Hunters Club in both San Sebastian, where they just opened up, and in Barcelona, and it's just a tremendous scene. They have 4 different magazines in Spain, all about cannabis, Yerba, Soft Secrets, Kenyamo, and they have a very vibrant club scene where people buy their marijuana, and it's a social hangout, wonderful places. And in Vancouver alone, we have 53 shops you can buy marijuana, and at a much cheaper price than in Spain, and for that matter, in Ireland and in Scotland. I'll do a little advertising for my hometown. It's a beautiful place. Vancouver, British Columbia is one of the most gorgeous places on earth. Weed's only like 125 pounds for an ounce. Really great stuff, right? A gram of marijuana in Vancouver you could easily get it for what's $5 Canadian to $10 Canadian. So let's just say that's like a little under 3 pounds a gram to a little under 6 pounds a gram. And you'll have no trouble finding marijuana, and you'll have a great time. It's an awesome place. So I just
10 pound a gram here. 10 pound a gram here.
10 pound a gram. And actually, that's not even, that's $17 a gram. Yeah, that's a fair bit of money, actually. Yeah. Well, I guarantee you, though, the revolution, the change, it's all going to come to Scotland and the UK, and we can really thank the election in Colorado in 2012 for that, because it set the gold standard for everything. By the way, my speech is all different and inverted today, so I'm going to get back to what I'm supposed to talk about. Well, all things, but Colorado is a wonderful experiment going on right now. Every single adult in Colorado can grow 6 plants of any size. You can have 1 light per plant, growing a pound per plant. They can have 12 plants per household. There are hundreds and hundreds of stores selling weed. There's hundreds of people licensed to grow it. It's got several magazines that have moved there. And a lot of medical people in the United States have moved to Colorado because they have an unlimited access to whatever strains they want to get. And they're seeing a lot of science go on there. There's exhibitions now. They have these huge exhibitions in these arenas. We're showing all the different equipment, all the different growing stuff, all the different things that you can buy to consume cannabis in. It's really revolutionized what's going on in America, what's going on in Colorado, because every legislator from all the other states of the United States are going to Colorado, and they're observing what we've always said would be true. See, this is the first place on earth we can actually demonstrate that what we've always said is coming true. Colorado's had legal marijuana for 2 years now in a few months, and crime is down. There is no health anomalies, there's no risk, people aren't quitting school to become potheads and what have you. None of the negative things we've heard all our life that would happen if we had legal have happened in Colorado. And in fact, they're producing tons of tax revenue, and it's specifically by law earmarked for schools and hospitals. So those things are being dealt with in Colorado. There's a lot of medical science exploration going on. And this is having a big impact all around the world. Everybody is talking about what happened in Colorado. All the legislators and politicians and countries are aware of what's going on in Colorado. And I think those are important things to bring up when you're dealing with politicians, as you must deal with politicians here, is have them research what's gone on in Colorado, because Colorado is a great success story that hopefully will be repeated. Alaska, Oregon, and Washington, D.C. all have legalization on the ballot there. And so we should see some really good things. But one of the things I normally start out by saying, but I've gotten all bollocks up here, is that why do we have marijuana prohibition? Like, marijuana is so unusual, cannabis is so unusual, it's without question the world's most beautiful and beneficial plant. There's absolutely no plant like that. Even when we consider about marijuana as a euphoric, something that just makes you feel good. At the simple level as that. Something that makes you feel good. It's the safest kind of thing that makes you feel good of anything you could possibly have. I went to a rally about a month ago, and that day I had smoked a lot of pot, and I got up and I said I was back to smoking 15 joints in a day. And I got criticized. I said, well, doesn't that sort of mean you're an addict at 15 joints? I said, no, my point with smoking 15 joints is that you couldn't do 15 of anything and not be completely debilitated or laid out flat or disgustingly, retching or any number of negative things. I mean, not just 15 beer or 15 shots. You couldn't have 15 coffees in the space of a couple hours without shaking and rattling. You couldn't do 15 of any prescription drug you've got without toxifying yourself. You couldn't have 15 Big Macs at a McDonald's without feeling terribly sick. 15 of anything, even 15 apples will give you indigestion because there's too much acid in the enzymes. It'll just make your stomach upset. There's a lot of things you couldn't do 15 doses of, right? But cannabis you can. I mean, the worst that's going to happen, and you know this, when you're giving somebody a brownie, and it was probably too strong, and they weren't ready for it, and next thing they're on the floor saying, oh, I feel terrible, I'm going to die. I've seen this about 4 or 5 times, so I know that's a fairly common thing. Right, every now and then somebody gets the bright idea that the cake for the wedding should have pot in it, but let's not tell anybody, right? So you get a lot of empirical examples of this behavior. But I've done it. I've given a brownie to somebody not knowing how cold it was, put it in the microwave, big mistake. Heating up the brownie will make it immensely more powerful. I gave it to somebody, they're on the floor going, oh, I'm dying. And they go, how long has it been? I said, it's been 5 minutes. And you're not dying. So come to bed, lie down, go to sleep, you'll be fine in the morning. And sure enough, they always are. Just a little bit of dry mouth, but otherwise no hangover, no negative thing, and they're never going to touch a brownie again, and that's the worst it gets, right? So that's the worst that can happen. And in a way, it's your own body even telling you, well, you just had too much. So we're going to be sick, but we'll be fine in the morning, right? Now, if only that alcohol kicked in on the same basis, but oftentimes you'll get sick and then the alcohol will kill you, right? Because it doesn't leave your system. Cannabis has a natural sort of setting, by which case when you've had too much, it's just going to stop everything, tell you you have to stop taking cannabis now, you have to go lie down, go to sleep, and tomorrow you'll be fine. So that's the worst that it gets, but how good it gets is amazing, because I think that the cannabis culture is probably the greatest culture in its contributions to humankind of, let's say, the last 50 years to be safe. Ever since the Beatles started smoking pot, let's say in 1964, after Bob Dylan gets them all high at the Delmonico's Hotel in New York City, ever since then, every pop record you have ever listened to was done by a pothead. I mean, whether it's Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, the Beatles from my generation, or Bob Marley, and every reggae artist smoked pot. Every hip-hop guy smokes pot. Every hip-hop woman who smoked pot, from Rihanna to Kanye, everybody, they're all smoking pot. Every blues musician that ever was from the 1930s smoked pot. Every jazz musician that ever recorded a record smoked pot. And so on it goes. And in fact, since Willie Nelson's like 9,000 years old now, as old as Methuselah, he's corrupted everybody in country music and they all smoke pot now. So you've got virtually every form of popular music is influenced by potheads. And it's really the most substantial contribution to the Western lifestyle. When they ask people, what is the most popular human endeavor? What do people like to do most? People like music. It's almost universal. You almost never meet someone that says, I don't like music. Because you have to look at that person, you don't like me. Like really all of it? Like you don't like any of it? Like it's impossible to think of like that. Well, 90% of all the music we enjoy, and that all people enjoy, comes from potheads. And here's the thing. We are smited nonetheless, because you think that would be the reason they should legalize right away. Well, to pay tribute to all that incredible music which we all enjoy, we should make pot legal, because that's the least we can do to honor all that incredible culture that we take advantage of. And the funny thing is that we as potheads appreciate creativity, but you think the people who don't smoke pot will be eternally grateful to the cannabis culture for making their lives so beautiful and improving it such. But it doesn't even stop there. Like cannabis is responsible for some of the world's great science, certainly some of the world's greatest business people, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all smoke lots of pot. I mean, people, architects, filmmakers, actors, you see it all the time in film and movies, people admitting to smoking pot, scientists of all kinds. In Canada, our leading rocket scientist, an astrophysicist who's a friend of mine, smokes copious amounts of hash. You'll never see this video. Not that he'd be upset, but, but people of importance in every field smoke marijuana. And we've made a great contribution